Hello everybody, let's have a look at how we can solve this particular problem on Grok. It's part of the Introduction to Programming with Blockly in the first section called Your First Program, and we're down a couple to the Meet the Puppy question. So let's have a look first of all at the question itself. It says that your friend has a new puppy and you need to write a program to tell the puppy to sit using its name like the examples here. And we're provided with two samples of this program running that we should use to test the program that we create. Let's first have a look at it. So we can see here that it is asking a question, and the answer that will be typed in by the user while the program is running in the first example is the word fluffy. And we then use that value, the one that they have typed in our response, which says to sit fluffy. If we look at the second working example, again we ask the same prompt. So we can see that the prompt for the question does not change between programs running. So that is what we would call static text, and we're going to use a string for that. We can see that a different input is typed in by the user while it's running, and so therefore we get a different output. So the word sit does not change, so that's also going to be some static text in a string, but the word that comes after it is going to change based on the value that the user types in. So as it says down here, when your program runs, it should wait for the user to type in the puppy's name using an ask block, and then it should use that name that they enter to tell the puppy to sit. And there's also a hint here that says make sure you give the ask the same prompt question that is used in the example above. So let's have a look at doing this. So the first thing is we have a question being asked at the top. And again, with Grok at least, the way it's formatted, if you see the blue text followed by the black writing like that, you can straight away know that you are asking a question that's going to be asked of the user while it's running. And if you're asking a question, you're trying to get some input, you know that that's going to need a variable to be stored in. There's no point asking for some information and then just basically forgetting it straight away. So let's make sure we do that. So the first thing I'm going to do actually is create that variable. And you can see here they've already created one for us. If there isn't one, we can create a new variable with a name, but I'm going to use this set name to be the place where I save the name of the puppy that they type in. Remember that the name of the variable doesn't matter. It could be called Fred, Joe, 27. It doesn't really matter, but we try to use names that help us to remember what will be inside them. So calling this variable name helps us to remember that, yep, inside there will be the name of something, in this case, the dog. I then want an input. It's the only way that we know so far to ask a question. So I'm going to put that inside the name. So it's going to ask a question, and the question it's going to ask has to be in this text here. This is the prompt. Now, this is what the hint was talking about. Make sure you use the same prompt. And the way to make sure you get that completely right is simply to copy it in this case. I'm going to copy and paste that in there to make sure I get everything correct, to make sure I get my punctuation, my capitals, my spaces correct. Make sure you do not copy the space here after the question mark. The ask will include a space automatically before the user types their answer in, and we will see that. Now we can already run this to test this works. So straight away we can see our prompt down the bottom. There is that space that I was just talking about, and we can type the word fluffy in and press enter. But of course we don't get the response yet. We haven't written that piece. So let's continue on. The second line is an output. We are writing the word sit with a space and then the name that they use. And that name is being stored again in our variable that we have happened to call name. So we're going to use an output because again, that's how we can output something to our users. We have two versions of our print output, one that takes a single piece to print and one that has two. Now let's have a think about this. We have two things to print. The word sit with a space and the name that they've typed in. So I think we can see that we need this print with two. So I'm going to put that underneath. Like I've been saying a few times, the word sit does not change. So we can just use a normal string, and I'm also going to copy that and paste it in to make sure I get everything correct. It might seem like a bit of overkill because it's just the word sit, but I like to get in the habit of copying and pasting. The piece that's going to be printed in this second spot is not a string, so we don't want one of these. It is the variable. It's the value inside this variable called name. So let's try running that and see what happens. So there's our prompt that we saw before. We write the word fluffy and press enter, and there we go. That output seems to match the output up there. But this is where we now run our program again and make sure that we test it with the second example. So we haven't changed the program in any way, but we can now type the word shadow in for our second dog's name, press enter, and we get the right output. So again, no program changes because it's using the values that the person has typed in. So one more time, let's have a look at this program. We start by creating a variable where we're going to save the name that they type in. We ask them a question and the question prompt is here, and whatever they type in when they press enter will be saved in that variable. Then we're going to print something to the screen. It starts by printing out some words that don't change. So this is just text, and then it prints out whatever the value of the variable is at the moment. Notice that I didn't put the space in again, because remember, this type of print block automatically includes a space between these elements. So hopefully that makes sense to you. Let's run it one more time because I have to run it before I can mark it. And I'll call Fluffy again. And if I try to run this now, sorry, mark this now, my apologies, I should get all the steps done. There we go. It's tested everything else and it's told me that I'm correct. So that is how we do this particular question. Again, if you have watched this from start to finish and you now have the answer, technically that's okay. But again, as I've talked about in classes, if you haven't understood this, there's no point just doing it, marking it, and trying to move on. If you haven't understood this question properly, you need to keep working on it until you understand each of those blocks and how they interact so that you are ready to move on to the next question.